left wasn't as crazy under Bush and Obama. They just weren't. And I was not going to hold my tongue when they went to places where, college kids marching for Hamas. Don't tell me there hasn't been a change.
Right.
And the victim culture, the cancel culture, she's not part of what they suspect she might be, sort of a stealth version of the worst excesses of the left. I said there's a coalition of Trump voters, people who really like him. They certainly are those. And then there's people who don't necessarily like him that much, but they still think he's less crazy.
Crazy, you'd think, after the beating MSNBC's taken in recent weeks, they dialed down the hypocrisy. Just a little, but nope. They didn't just double down, they turned the dial all the way up. Their obsession with dragging Trump out of office has blinded them to their own absurd double standards. And Bill Maher, he's not letting that slide. He came in hot, torching their fake outrage with surgical precision. No filter, no mercy, just brutal honesty, and we got every scorched receipt to prove it, so buckle up. It's about to get spicy. Maher's latest target, none other than MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, who tried and failed to bait Maher into bashing the Republican Party. But Maher didn't take the bait. Instead, he flipped the script with razor-sharp precision and went after Scarborough and the DNC in one brilliant takedown. Take a listen.
How long have we
After all
been
these
doing
years,
this? I'm seriously, what's it been?
I don't know. Well, you were on Politically Incorrect, right? That was the 90s when you were a congressman from Florida.
The 90s, exactly. And first show I was on, this guy stands up and points at me, goes, "You're a racist."
Who's that? Who was it?
I forget who it was. And then you defended
Did he
me.
mean it?
Of course he meant it. But
Well, he's a comedian.
That's from the South. He's a comedian. I wasn't insulted by it. I bet you stood up for me.
Well, that is a fundamental problem we've had for a long time. Well, two problems. One, there are racists in the Republican Party, as many people have. Well, I mean, there always have been. There used to be more in the Democratic Party. They were the Dixiecrat. But as someone once said, is every Republican a racist? Of course not. But if you're a racist, that is the party you're going to gravitate toward. But also there is a big problem of calling every Republican a racist and calling everything racism.
Now, if you're not caught up, here's the backstory. Joe Scarborough, he used to be a Republican congressman, but somewhere along the way he got swept up by the leftist current these days. He's firmly camped out in their corner, though he'll never admit out loud in the clip we just played. Scarborough tried to steer the conversation into familiar territory, accusing the GOP of racism. But Maher wasn't having it. He flipped the script and called out the Democrats for their own racial hypocrisy. That's when Joe started squirming in his seat. But Maher, he didn't flinch. He doubled down.
The left wasn't as crazy under Bush and Obama. They just weren't. And I was not going to hold my tongue.
Bill Maher was just getting warmed up, and Scarborough, he was visibly squirming in his seat. You could almost hear the panic in his head. This isn't how the conversation was supposed to go. Scarborough clearly thought Maher was still the same guy from 4 or 5 years ago, the one who'd go off the rails the moment someone mentioned Republican. But not anymore. The new Maher isn't playing by the old rules. He's sharper, more independent, and unapologetically calling out both sides of the political circus, and that made Scarborough deeply uncomfortable. You could see it in his body language, shifting, smirking, reaching for some moral high ground. That just wasn't there. My challenge. The narrative broke the script and made it clear he's not anyone's puppet.
College kids marching for Hamas? Don't tell me there hasn't been a change.
Right.
And the victim culture, the cancel culture.
I will say this, though. Listen, I agree. There's been a change on the left. But let's just talk about Hamas for a second. Let's talk about college campuses. I remember back when I started Scarborough Country in 2003, we were talking about the radicalism at Columbia, the anti-Semitism coming from the college professors. I don't know that that's changed that much. I think there's been anti-Semitism at elite colleges for a really long time.
I don't think it's rooted in anti-Semitism. I think it's rooted in anti-colonialism and their erroneous view that the Israelis are colonizers,
Like somebody should really tell them that, like, European colonialists killed 6 million of them not too long ago.
Exactly. I mean, that's just part of it, but certainly that's a relevant thing to bring up. But, colonialism, which now is mostly a thing of the past in the world, due to the work of other generations.
You could clearly see that Scarborough was getting visibly uncomfortable as the conversation veered into territory. He wasn't ready to defend, so like clockwork, he pivoted this time. The new safe zones were anti-Semitism and colonialism classic misdirection. And this is exactly the problem. Anytime someone starts holding the left accountable, the response is almost textbook duck, dodge, shift the goalposts, or completely change the subject. But let's be honest, anti-Semitism hasn't just surfaced under the Biden administration. It's been fueled by left-wing disinformation and moral relativism. Just look at the explosion of anti-Semitic rhetoric on college campuses, where progressive student groups openly cheered Hamas after the October 7 attacks, or members of the squad, like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who repeatedly echoed anti-Israel talking points that cross into anti-Semitic territory, then gaslight the public when called out under the guise of anti-colonialism and social justice far left. Activists have created an environment where anti-Semitism isn't just tolerated, it's repackaged as virtue, and Maher he sees through it, Scarborough not so much.
It's anti-historical. The Jews were there 700 years before Islam even existed, or more, probably 1700 years, but certainly the temple was built a long time before Islam came along in the 7th century, 6th century. There's always been a presence there. There was a UN resolution that said divide the land. One group went with it. One group never has agreed to it. And let's be honest, a lot of that is because the says Jews bad. I think we could solve this if that wasn't, if that wasn't a big part of like why they hate having them in that region. Most people around the world that have territorial disputes, it doesn't go on forever.
This was without question the most honest and accurate breakdown of the Israel-Palestine conflict I've heard in a long time. Didn't sugarcoat, didn't pander. He laid out the history with clarity and conviction. If only the mainstream media had the guts to push this narrative, maybe we wouldn't see thousands wasting time, energy, and resources on misguided protests and performative outrage. But they won't, whether it's fear of backlash, political bias, or a deeper ideological agenda the media refuses. To tell the full story, instead, they spin half-truths, cherry-pick sound bites, and feed young, impressionable Americans a heavily distorted version of reality. One designed to provoke emotions, not promote understanding the result of a generation that's marching for slogans without understanding the history behind them. They're being emotionally manipulated into choosing sides in a deeply complex issue, one that requires nuance, not narrative-driven hysteria. And he just exposed that media charade for what is a dangerous game with real-world consequences.
Talk about Israel for the entire time here, but I want to get back to you haven't changed. So you consider yourself a liberal, right?
I consider myself an old school liberal. You have to make that distinction now because, the word woke, which started out as a good thing, being alert to injustice, and a lot of people get triggered by the word because when they hear it, they think of it the old meaning, which was good.
Right.
Stay woke. But I'm sorry, language is a living, breathing entity. Words change and they migrate and they take on a different meaning. And woke now has to answer for, or for people have just used the word to ascribe a number of extreme things.
Poor Joe Scarborough. This just wasn't his day. The man's usual playbook fell flat. And try as he might, he just couldn't get Bill Maher to take the bait and go off on the right. Every attempt to steer the conversation toward a safe Republican bashing session completely backfired. Instead, Maher turned the spotlight on the left and their loyal media lapdogs, tearing into the very ideology Scarborough now panders to the cult of wokeness. And it wasn't. Subtle Maher was relentless, precise, and unapologetically critical. At this point, it was beyond awkward. Scarborough, a seasoned journalist with decades in the game, looked visibly cornered, like a man realizing the conversation had slipped far beyond his control. You could almost see him scanning for an exit, grasping for a lifeline, any way to pivot back to safe territory. But there was no escape. Maher had seized a moment. And Joe, he was just along for the ride. Scarborough wasn't the only prey in. Maher cites another victim of Maher on the night was Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I was talking about it in the editorial tonight. Kamala's big, I think, challenge here to win over the undecided voters is to convince them that she's not part of what they suspect she might be sort of a stealth version of the worst excesses of the left. I said there's a coalition of Trump voters, people who really like him. They certainly are those. And then there's people who don't necessarily like him that much, but they still think he's less crazy than stuff that strikes them as aggressively anti-common sense.
Right.
That takes place on the...
Unfortunately for Kamala Harris, she couldn't shake off the stench of wokeness, no matter how hard she tried her policies or rhetoric. Even her carefully scripted interviews all screamed the same thing. She was neck deep in a progressive echo chamber, whether it was identity politics, selective outrage, or her relentless focus on virtue, signaling over substance. Harris made it clear she wasn't just associated with the woke movement. She was one of its loudest ambassadors, and that came at a cost. Voters saw through the performative politics. They weren't buying the carefully curated sound bites or the hollow appeals to social justice. They wanted real answers, real leadership, not another lecture about pronouns and equity quotas. Harris's inability to distance herself from that ideology didn't just hurt her, it dragged the entire Democratic Party down. With her last year's election losses weren't just political, they were a wake-up call. Americans are exhausted by ideological purity tests and performative politics, and Kamala, she became the poster child for exactly what voters rejected. At this point, Scarborough was really feeling the heat, so he decided to pivot once again.
It's very easy to say, yeah, I said that in 2019. I was in a competitive thing. Now, she did say, I think she said this was the law under Trump, too. He didn't change it. But it's very easy to say, I don't believe that anymore.
Right.
On that issue, she should. I wanted to ask you, so you're an old line liberal.
I think so.
I'm an old line conservative. I still believe in the balanced budgets, a strong southern border, a tough reaction to military aggression from Russia, et cetera, et cetera. And yet you and I find ourselves, I think, more in the same place because of the extremes on both sides. Talk about how crazy things have gotten and how we got here.
Well, that's it. I feel like I speak for a different group of people. You ask why the audience is different. That's why. Because I want a group of people who are not ideologically captured by either.
Amen to that. I couldn't agree more. I look forward to seeing an America that finally puts the country first, not party loyalty or partisan theater, a nation where common sense prevails over blind ideology, where decisions are made based on what actually works, not what earns applause from Twitter mobs or cable news pundits. We need a citizenry that isn't ideologically captured by either side of the aisle. Loyalty should lie with principles, not personalities. It's time we start holding all our leaders accountable regardless of the letter next to their name. If your preferred candidate fails to push policies that protect individual freedoms, promote economic opportunity, and uphold national integrity, then it's your duty to call them out, criticize them, vote against them if necessary. Blind allegiance is how bad policies thrive. It's how corruption furs real patriotism. Means demanding better from everyone in power, even the ones you once supported. That's how we fix this country, not with slogans or tribalism, but with reason, accountability, and the courage to think independently.
Tired of the extremes and the extremists who dominate the debate. They have the megaphone and we hear them more, but I don't think they represent what most people in the country talk about. I think almost any issue you could actually come up with a reasonable middle ground. In the overtime segment tonight, the subject of race and we were talking about young men who are now like in college, the ones who are going to need affirmative action. You have to, on the one hand, understand you benefited from racism if you're white. There's no doubt about it. And that has to be addressed. It can't be ignored.
Right.
But also, I didn't personally do it. There's a middle ground there. It's very different.
And that's exactly why so many people respect Bill Maher, because he calls it like he sees it. No sugarcoating, no party scripted talking points, just raw, unfiltered honesty in a world where most voices are either shouting from the far left or screaming from the far right. My dares to stand in the uncomfortable, often unpopular middle. There's a middle ground on most issues, somewhere between the extremes where reason, practicality, and mutual respect can coexist. Sure, as Maher himself has pointed out, not every issue lends itself to compromise. Some things really are black and white, but far more often it's just easier for people to pick a side than actually think critically. Still, If we deliberately commit to seeking that elusive middle ground through honest dialogue, open minds, and a willingness to challenge our own biases, we can find it might take effort, and it might make us uncomfortable, but that's where real progress lives. The middle isn't. Weakness, it's wisdom, and in today's political chaos, voices like Maher's remind us that thinking for yourself is the most rebellious act of all. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, then hit the like button. And subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next installment.